Imagine you are the most powerful sovereign in the known world.
Right.
Like you're the sole architect of a massive nation's survival during this catastrophic global crisis. And one day, right into your court, walk the very men who abused you.
The ones who betrayed you entirely.
Exactly. The men who left you for dead in the bottom of a well decades ago. They are standing right in front of you. And, they have absolutely no idea who you are.
They're completely at your mercy.
Completely. I mean, you could execute them with a snap of your fingers. You could throw them in a dungeon and just let them rot. But instead of violence, instead of this dramatic emotional outburst of revenge, you do something entirely different.
Yeah, you use international law.
You use international law, psychological warfare, and their own archaic rule book to legally, systematically, and flawlessly dismantle their entire reality. Welcome to the deep dive.
It's the absolute definition of a masterful, multi-layered sovereign gambit.
It really is.
Yeah.
Today, we're unpacking a narrative that usually gets treated like a dusty, comforting fable. You know how it goes with ancient texts. We expect a simple morality tale where the good guy wins, the bad guys learn a lesson, and we all go home feeling a little more righteous.
But that simplistic framework is about to be completely shattered today.
Totally shattered. We are looking at a highly analytical, in-depth commentary by the scholar Allama Parwez. And we're focusing on a very specific portion of ancient scripture, Surah 12, the story of Yusuf, or Joseph, specifically verses 66 through 82.
And, we really need to establish the ground rules for how we are navigating this material today.
Yeah, that's important.
The commentary we're exploring offers a fiercely rationalist interpretation. So our mission is to impartially examine this unique perspective, extracting the fascinating legal, strategic, and psychological frameworks it presents.
Right.
We aren't here to endorse any specific religious dogma or to preach a sermon. If you're listening to this, you don't need to hold any specific theological belief to appreciate what we're about to dissect.
Exactly. We're looking at this as a master class in strategy. Think of it like a chess game, but an incredibly asymmetrical one.
A rigged game, almost.
Yeah, a game where the winner doesn't just beat the opponent by overpowering them. He forces the opponent to use their own rule book to put themselves into checkmate, completely willingly, and without ever breaking a single law of his own country.
To understand the sheer brilliance of how that checkmate is executed, we have to understand the board first.
Right, the setup.
We have to start before the brothers even arrive in Egypt. The narrative resumes with Yusuf's brothers, who are from Canaan, needing to return to Egypt to procure grain during this massive regional famine. But their father, Yaqub, or Jacob, throws a massive wrench into their plans.
A huge wrench.
He insists that to get his blessing for this trip, they must take their youngest brother, Benjamin, with them.
Which is a massive deal, because the last time these older brothers took a younger sibling out on a trip, it was Yusuf, decades ago.
And he mysteriously disappeared.
Right, disappeared. The brothers came back with a blood-stained shirt and this highly suspicious story about a wolf. So the father has lived with this profound grief and deep suspicion for years. He's not about to just let his youngest son walk out the door.
No, not at all.
He demands an absolute ironclad pledge for Benjamin's safe return. But what really caught my attention isn't just the emotional weight of that promise, it's the extremely tactical advice he gives them right after.
Oh, the security protocol?
Yes. He gives them this highly specific set of instructions for their journey. He tells them, and I'm quoting the translation of the text here, do not enter the city from one gate, but enter from different gates.
And this is where the rationalist lens of our source material really begins to shine, because, traditional commentaries over the centuries have often glossed over this instruction.
Yeah, make it mystical.
Exactly. They'll sometimes attribute it to a mystical desire to ward off the evil eye. The idea being that a large group of handsome, robust brothers walking together would attract negative spiritual energy.
Which, frankly, feels like a massive stretch when you consider the actual stakes of what's happening on the ground.
It fundamentally ignores the geopolitical reality of the era. The commentary insists we look at this through the lens of pure logic and historical context. You have to understand what a major fortified city looked like back then. The text explicitly compares it to the ancient walled city of Lahore.
Okay, let's paint that picture for the listener. Because if you've never studied ancient urban architecture, a walled city isn't just a town with a fence around it.
No, it's a massive, impenetrable fortress designed to repel armies.
Right.
And crucially, it has specific bottlenecked entry points, the gates. These gates are heavily guarded choke points. Now, put yourself in the shoes of the Egyptian border security.
So?
You are in the middle of a catastrophic global famine. Resources are incredibly scarce. National security is at its absolute peak. Paranoia is high. Suddenly, a massive coordinated gang of foreign men, all traveling in a tight-knit group, marches up to a single gate of the fortified capital city.
It's essentially ancient operational security, or OPSEC. Like if I'm an Egyptian guard, my hand is immediately on my weapon. I'm flagging this group as a potential threat.
Absolutely.
Are they a raiding party? Are they an espionage ring sent by a neighboring kingdom to assess our grain reserves? They are raising a massive signature in a highly sensitive, hostile environment.
Exactly. Yaqub is essentially a tactician here. He is telling them to travel incognito. He's saying, break up your formation, stagger your entry, go in groups of 2 or 3, blend in with the other refugees and merchants. Do not trigger the state's security apparatus.
Wow.
It is a completely pragmatic, rational infiltration protocol.
And this a seemingly small historical detail is the launching pad for what might be one of the most radical philosophical shifts in this entire text. Because the commentary uses this tactical move to completely redefine a core concept.
The concept of tawakkul.
Right, tawakkul, which is almost universally translated as trust in God.
It's a profound paradigm shift. Think about how the phrase trust in God or leap of faith is usually used today. Usually it implies a kind of passive surrender, right? Magical thinking. Like, I haven't studied for this test at all, but I'm going to walk into the exam room and just trust that the universe will guide my pencil to the right answers.
Yeah.
Or, I'm going to step out into busy traffic and just trust that I won't get hit.
The text argues vehemently against that kind of magical thinking. It asserts that this is a total corruption of the concept. True trust, according to this framework, requires a deep fundamental understanding of the laws of the universe.
Both physical and social laws.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And aligning your actions with them. The universe is not a chaotic place governed by arbitrary miracles. It is a system operating on fixed, immutable laws.
Let's unpack the analogies the source uses to explain this, because they are incredibly vivid.
Consider the physical law of thermodynamics. You can only trust that water will boil if you understand the laws of heat, atmospheric pressure, and time. You put the water in a vessel, you apply a specific amount of heat, you wait the required minutes, and the result, boiling water, is guaranteed by the physical law.
You don't just put a pot of cold water on an unlit stove, close your eyes, and trust it to boil through the sheer power of your belief.
The analogy that really crystallized this for me was the parachute. If you were going to jump out of an airplane, you don't just leap out the door in your street clothes, flap your arms, and call it trusting the process.
No, of course not.
That's not trust. That's just a fundamental misunderstanding of gravity, and it has a very predictable, very fatal outcome.
You can only trust a parachute if you understand the laws of aerodynamics. You pack the chute meticulously according to those laws. You calculate your altitude. You pull the ripcord at the precise moment dictated by physics.
Right.
You fulfill every single requirement of the physical law. And then and only then do you trust the outcome. The trust isn't in magic. The trust is in the integrity of the law you just utilized.
So bringing this back to the father, Yaqub, he isn't sending his sons off in a massive suspicious group and just praying that the Egyptian border guards will be magically blinded to their presence. He doesn't rely on a miracle to bypass border security. He respects the social physics of the walled city. He implements his OPSEC protocol, entering through different gates. He basically packs the parachute correctly, and then he trusts the outcome to the overarching system.
Which brings us to a really uncomfortable friction point for a lot of traditional readings of ancient texts. If these figures, these prophets, are bound by the same physical and social laws as the rest of us, what happens to the idea of prophecy?
Oh, right.
We have this entrenched cultural assumption that ancient prophets basically walked around with crystal balls, that they possessed an unfettered view of the future.
Right. The assumption is that Yaqub must have known exactly what was going to happen to his sons because he's a prophet. He must have had a direct download of future events.
But the commentary actively dismantles that assumption. It argues absolutely against the idea that prophets possess magical fortune-telling abilities for mundane, everyday events. And to explain why, it delves into a fascinating philosophical distinction regarding the concept of ghaib.
The unseen.
Yes, the unseen. To illustrate this, the text references an analogy by J.W.N. Sullivan, an early 20th century science writer.
Oh, walk us through the Sullivan analogy because it completely rewired how I think about predicting the future.
It's a brilliant exploration of the boundary between physical determinism and human agency. Sullivan poses a scenario. He says, imagine you have a team of the most brilliant astrophysicists in human history sitting around the table.
Okay.
You ask them to calculate exactly where Jupiter will be or when the next solar eclipse will occur 100 years from this exact moment.
And they can do it down to the millisecond.
Flawlessly, because planets, stars, and celestial bodies do not possess free will. They are absolutely inextricably bound by the physical laws of gravity and momentum. They have no choice but to obey the mathematical calculation. Their future is deterministic.
But then Sullivan shifts the focus to something seemingly much simpler.
He says, imagine a common housefly flies into the room and lands on that same table where all these brilliant scientists are sitting. Not a single scientist in that room, nor all the supercomputers in the world combined, can predict with absolute certainty exactly where that fly will dart next.
Because the fly has agency. It has a degree of autonomous will. It makes a choice.
Precisely. The moment you introduce conscious agency, even the rudimentary agency of an insect predicting the future with mathematical certainty becomes inherently impossible. Beings with free will are not deterministic planets.
So if you apply that to human beings who possess the ultimate degree of free will, the unpredictability is magnified exponentially.
Which is exactly the text's point about Yaqub. He couldn't magically foresee what would happen to his sons in Egypt because human agency was the dominant variable. The choices of the Egyptian border guards, the psychological reactions of his sons, the strategic decisions of the Egyptian minister who he doesn't know as Yusuf, all of these represent human free will.
Right.
He didn't have a crystal ball to see through all those autonomous choices.
So what did he have? If he can't see the future, how is he leading his people?
He relied on a concept called firasat. This is often translated loosely, but in this context, it means profound insight, hypervigilant situational awareness, and deep strategic planning based on the known laws of human behavior.
Wow.
He couldn't predict the exact future, so he planned for the variables he could control, like their entry formation, and accepted the inherent unpredictability of human free will.
Okay, so the brothers, following the OPSEC protocol perfectly, stagger their entry. They make it into the city successfully, avoiding the security alarms. They eventually arrive at the court of the sovereign, the powerful Egyptian minister who controls the distribution of the grain.
Right.
And they are completely unaware that this terrifyingly powerful figure is secretly their betrayed brother, Yusuf. And here is where we transition from a story of survival into a masterfully engineered heist.
It is a covert operation disguised as a bureaucratic procedure.
The text notes that Yusuf manages to secretly pull his youngest brother Benjamin aside. He reveals his true identity to him in private. He comforts him, telling him not to grieve over the terrible things the older brothers have done in the past.
Right, so Benjamin is now on the inside.
Exactly. He knows the minister is his long-lost brother, and once that alliance is secured, the trap is set.
The catalyst for the entire operation is a single object, the royal drinking cup.
The text says this highly valuable piece of state property is placed into Benjamin's saddlebag as they are packing up their grain to leave.
And we really need to pause and examine the specific linguistic nuance the commentary highlights right here.
Okay.
The grammatical structure used in the original language to describe the placement of the cup is entirely deliberate, strategic, and active. It is not a passive accident.
Right. It doesn't say the cup accidentally found its way to the bag or someone misplaced the cup.
No, it indicates a deliberate architectural move engineered by Yusuf. He or his trusted agents planted the cup in Benjamin's bag.
Okay, wait. I have to stop right here because I'm hitting a wall mentally. If we are looking at this through the lens of pure rational ethics, isn't this just straight-up entrapment?
It definitely sounds like it.
I mean, isn't planting evidence highly unethical? We're reading a text that is fundamentally about a righteous, profoundly ethical leader. But he secretly plants a stolen royal item in his own brother's luggage to frame him.
Right.
If a police officer did that today, it would be a gross violation of justice. How does the commentary justify this action without making Yusuf look corrupt?
It's the essential question to ask, and the commentary tackles it head-on by forcing us to look at the intention and the recipient of the action. If you view this as Yusuf planting evidence to frame an innocent person so they can be wrongfully punished, then yes, it is entirely unethical.
Right.
But the text argues that is a fundamental misreading of the mechanics of what is happening.
Because Benjamin isn't a victim here.
Exactly. Yusuf isn't framing Benjamin to harm him. Remember the sequence of events. He has already pulled Benjamin aside and revealed his identity. Benjamin is in on it. This isn't a frame-up. This is a covert extraction operation.
Let's expand on why an extraction was necessary. Why couldn't Yusuf just say, hey, I'm the minister, you're my brother, you're staying here with me in luxury, the rest of you guys can go back to Canaan?
Think about the geopolitical reality. Yusuf is an incredibly high-ranking official in the Egyptian government. He is essentially the prime minister. He cannot just arbitrarily kidnap a foreign citizen, even if that citizen is his brother.
Right, that makes sense.
And he certainly can't do it without causing a massive diplomatic incident with the Canaanite tribes, or without having to publicly explain his entire traumatic backstory to the Egyptian court, which he clearly does not want to do yet.
So he needs a legal mechanism.
Yes. He needs a legal mechanism to keep Benjamin in Egypt, safe from the older, corrupt brothers who already disappeared one sibling.
So the planted cup isn't evidence of a crime. It's the catalyst designed to trigger a very specific legal mechanism.
Precisely. And the commentary highlights a crucial, often overlooked detail about how the alarm is raised. When the cup is discovered missing, Yusuf himself does not ride out and accuse his brothers. He doesn't point a finger at a specific individual.
Wait, really?
The text says a crier, a guard, or an official simply shouts after the departing caravan, "Oh, caravan, you are thieves."
That distinction is fascinating.
It is a brilliant diplomatic maneuver. By having a state official announce a general theft, Yusuf initiates a massive security lockdown and a formal legal process. And this is vital, he does so without ever having to perjure himself. He never personally lies.
Wow.
He never officially presses false charges against a specific individual. He doesn't break the laws of his own nation. He simply creates a structural vacuum, a crisis scenario, knowing exactly how his targets will react when placed under pressure.
He's playing the man, not the board. He knows their psychology so intimately that he can predict their exact legal and emotional responses. So the caravan is halted by Egyptian security forces. The guards surround them, the tension is incredibly high, and the interrogation begins.
Right.
But the guards don't just arrest them. They don't slap them in irons and drag them to an Egyptian dungeon. Instead, they ask a very specific, carefully engineered question.
The guards ask them, what is the penalty for this if you are liars? Meaning, if we find this stolen royal property among your belongings, what should the punishment be?
And this is the psychological crux of the entire operation. It is an absolute masterstroke of interrogation strategy.
Yeah.
Yusuf, acting through his security forces, deliberately allows the brothers to declare their own punishment. He actively chooses not to impose Egyptian law on them. He asks them to define the jurisdictional penalty.
To put this into a modern context, think about complex international law. Imagine a scenario where a foreign national commits a severe crime while visiting another country. The host country arrests them, but instead of immediately putting them through the local justice system, the host country's prosecutor says, you know what, we won't use our courts. Tell us how your courts, your tribal laws back home in your country would handle this exact crime. We will defer entirely to your legal framework.
It's a jurisdictional trap. And the brothers walk right into it, completely blind.
Yeah.
Why? Because of their arrogance.
Oh.
They are absolutely, unshakably certain that they are innocent. They know they didn't steal the cup, and they have no idea that Benjamin is part of an extraction plan. They think this is just a misunderstanding that they can easily clear up.
Exactly.
So, puffing up their chests to prove how righteous and honorable they are, they confidently state their archaic tribal law.
They tell the Egyptian guards, he in whose bag the cup is found, he himself is the penalty.
He himself is the penalty, meaning the thief doesn't just pay a fine or go to jail. The thief loses his autonomy. He becomes a slave to the victim.
They write their own doom. And what the commentary points out here is just staggering when you realize the legal maneuvering. Why is allowing them to state their own law such a genius move by Yusuf?
Let's play out the alternative. What if Yusuf had just applied Egyptian law?
Well, if Yusuf had used the standard Egyptian legal code for theft, the penalty might have been restitution, maybe a hefty fine, perhaps a beating, or a few months in a local prison. And after that sentence was served, Benjamin would be deported.
Oh, wow.
He would be sent right back to Canaan, right back into the hands of the deeply corrupt older brothers who cannot be trusted. Yusuf would have absolutely no legal sovereign right to keep him permanently in the royal court.
But by psychologically manipulating the brothers into declaring their own archaic tribal law as the binding jurisdiction for this specific incident, Yusuf legally extradites Benjamin under their own stated terms.
The brothers have legally bound themselves. Yusuf committed no abuse of power. He didn't act as a tyrant. He broke no Egyptian laws. He simply held them, perfectly and uncompromisingly, to the very standard they arrogantly set for themselves.
He used their own rule book to checkmate them. It's a flawless operation. So the jurisdictional trap is set, the legal framework is agreed upon by all parties. Now the execution begins, the search of the bags. And the commentary focuses heavily on the concept of the hujjat here.
Yes. Hujjat translates to the conclusive proof, the undeniable empirical reality. And the tactical execution of building this proof is incredibly deliberate. The text notes that Yusuf's guards don't just walk straight up to Benjamin's saddlebag and open it to find the cup.
Right, because if they did that, it would look incredibly suspicious. The older brothers would immediately realize it was a targeted setup.
Yeah.
They would argue that the search was rigged.
Exactly. So the search is methodical, painstakingly slow. They start with the older brothers' bags first.
Imagine the agonizing suspense of that scene. Picture the oldest brothers, standing there in the desert dust, surrounded by armed Egyptian guards. They are arrogant, smug. They're watching bag after bag being opened, emptied out, and cleared.
Yeah.
With every empty bag, their confidence skyrockets. They're probably thinking, see? We told you we were honorable men. You're wasting your time.
They are completely oblivious to the fact that Yusuf is engineering an undeniable empirical reality. He is meticulously building the hujjat. By searching the eldest, then the next, systematically working all the way down the line to the youngest, he preemptively eliminates any shadow of a doubt. He removes any possible accusation of a targeted frame-up or a rushed investigation.
And then they get to the final bag, Benjamin's bag. They open it up, and there is the gleaming royal cup. The trap snaps shut.
When the cup is pulled from that bag, the proof is absolute. The hujjat is established. There is no room for argument. There is no room for them to say, you didn't search properly, or someone must have slipped it in while you weren't looking. The empirical fact, the physical evidence, combined with the legal jurisdiction they themselves established, is staring them in the face.
It's the ultimate realization that they are completely powerless against the system they just validated. And to understand the depth of Yusuf's commitment to this system, the commentary spends a significant amount of time analyzing a specific, highly misunderstood term used in the text right here, Din al-Malik. Let's unpack this, because understanding this term completely changes how we read not just this story, but potentially the entire framework of these ancient narratives.
The linguistic analysis here is profound. Parwez deeply dissects the term din. In modern colloquial usage, people almost exclusively translate din as religion. They interpret it in a very private, spiritual, or ritualistic sense, like sermons, prayers, or personal theological beliefs.
Right, so if someone reads Din al-Malik, they might think it means the religion of the king, like Yusuf was following the king's personal spiritual beliefs.
But the commentary argues forcefully that in the context of the Quranic text, particularly in this geopolitical narrative, din does not mean private religion. It means the actual secular, enforceable sovereign law of the state. The Din al-Malik is the constitutional framework, the legal apparatus of Egypt.
So when the text explicitly states that Yusuf operated within the Din al-Malik, it means he bound himself completely to the enforceable legal system of the nation he was operating in.
Yes. And consider the incredible, almost superhuman self-restraint required for him to do this. Think about his position. Yusuf is effectively the most powerful man in the region, second only to the king himself. He has absolute command over the military and the resources.
Right.
When he saw Benjamin, his beloved little brother, standing there, he had the raw power to just order his guards to seize him. He could have operated as a tyrant. He could have said, I am the state and I want this boy.
But he actively chooses not to.
He subordinates his immense personal desires, his deep emotional longing for his family, to the absolute, uncompromising nature of a true judicial system. He achieves his ultimate goal, keeping his brother safe, but he only allows himself to achieve it by navigating the complex, enforceable laws of the state and the international tribal agreements he negotiated on the spot.
It highlights the fundamental difference between wielding raw power and wielding systemic power. Raw power just breaks the rules to get what it wants, which inevitably leads to tyranny and instability. Systemic power masters the rules. It works within the constraints of reality to engineer a flawless outcome. But to master those external rules, you have to possess complete and total mastery over yourself.
Which is exactly what is tested next, because once the cup is found, the social physics of the situation shift dramatically.
The conclusive proof, a hujat, is sitting right there on the table. The brothers are cornered. The archaic tribal law they so arrogantly declared just minutes ago is about to swallow them whole. They're facing the reality that one of their own is about to be enslaved. How do they react? Do they band together? Do they defend their youngest brother?
They react exactly how corrupt systems always react when finally faced with absolute, unavoidable accountability. They turn on each other instantly. Their tribal solidarity, which looked so strong from the outside, was actually entirely based on mutual self-interest, deceit, and a shared history of violence. The moment that self-interest is threatened by empirical proof, the solidarity shatters.
Faced with the cup, they don't try to defend Benjamin. They don't question the evidence. They don't ask for an investigation.
No, they immediately distance themselves. According to the text, their immediate reaction is to throw Benjamin entirely under the bus. They say to the Egyptian guards, if he stole, well, a brother of his stole before him.
A brother of his. They are standing in the court of the sovereign, speaking to the sovereign, and they are referencing Yusuf himself.
They are essentially saying, listen, don't judge the rest of us based on this kid. We are the good, noble brothers from the father's first wife. This kid, Benjamin, is from the second wife. Just like that other brother we had, Yusuf. Clearly, theft and corruption must just run in that side of the family.
It is so incredibly cowardly. It is character assassination as a defense mechanism. They are perfectly willing to slander the memory of the brother they betrayed, completely unaware that he is the man standing right in front of them, orchestrating this entire reality. And this specific lie, this claim that Yusuf stole when he was young, brings up a massive historiographical debate that the commentary spends a lot of time dismantling. It's the story of the ant's bracelet.
It is a fascinating tangent, and it's absolutely crucial for understanding the methodology of how Parwez approaches historical texts. You see, over the centuries, traditional commentators read this verse where the brothers say, a brother of his stole before him, and they felt a deep sense of cognitive dissonance.
Why?
Because they wanted to believe that the brothers, as the patriarchs of tribes, were ultimately righteous men who just made a mistake. They couldn't accept that the brothers would just invent a bald-faced lie about a prophet. So to explain why the brothers would accuse Yusuf of stealing, later scholars invented a convoluted backstory.
The fable of the ant. Walk us through it.
The invented story goes like this. When Yusuf was a young boy, he was raised for a time by his aunt, who loved him deeply. When the time came for Yusuf to return to his father, Yaqub, the aunt didn't want to let him go, so she secretly took her own valuable belt or bracelet and tied it around young Yusuf's waist under his clothes.
Okay.
Then she raised an alarm, claiming her property was stolen. They searched everyone, found it on Yusuf, and because of that same archaic tribal law, the thief becomes a slave to the victim. Yusuf was forced to stay with his aunt.
So these later scholars use this made-up story to say, see, the brothers weren't technically lying to the Egyptian minister. Yusuf really was involved in a theft incident as a child, even if he was an innocent pawn in his aunt's scheme.
Exactly. They use it to soften the blow of the brothers' corruption. But Parwez aggressively attacks this interpretation. He absolutely destroys it.
Why does he go after it so hard?
Because he argues it is retrospective character assassination of a prophet committed by the very scholars trying to defend the text. Parwez argues that trying to justify the brothers' slander by inventing a ridiculous story where a supposedly righteous figure was immersed in deception and false theft from childhood completely undermines the moral and logical integrity of the entire narrative.
It's bending over backward to protect the abusers at the expense of the victim's history.
Exactly. Parwez's rationalist conclusion is much simpler and far more devastating. The brothers are simply lying. Full stop. There was no aunt's bracelet. There was no childhood theft. The brothers are cornered animals lying to save their own skins. They are projecting their own deeply corrupt, deceitful nature onto Yusuf to deflect blame from themselves. It is pure psychological projection.
So put yourself in Yusuf's shoes in this exact moment. Think about the emotional physics of this scene. You are sitting on the throne of a superpower. You have spent decades rising from being a discarded slave in a well to possessing ultimate authority. The men who abused you are standing right in front of you. Not only have you systematically trapped them in a legal vice of their own making, but now as they squirm, you have to listen to them slander your name to your face.
Yeah.
You have to listen to them call you a thief to justify abandoning your little brother. If you're listening to this, ask yourself, how do you not snap? How does someone maintain any level of composure when their abusers are lying about them to their face?
That supreme emotional regulation is the absolute crux of his power. The text explicitly notes Yusuf's reaction. It says he suppressed it in himself and did not reveal his identity to them.
He doesn't take the bait.
He cannot take the bait. Despite the overwhelming surge of emotion that must have been present, the righteous anger, the decades of trauma, the intense desire to stand up, throw off his royal headdress and scream, "I am the brother you are slandering." He remains the impassive, stoic judge. He embodies the Din al-Malik.
If we think about the mechanics of what would happen if he did react emotionally, it would ruin everything.
It would instantly destroy the hujjat, the conclusive proof he just spent all this time building.
Yeah.
If he reveals his identity in a fit of anger right then, he turns a flawless, objective judicial proceeding into a personal, emotional revenge plot.
The brothers would immediately seize on that. They would say, oh, we get it now. This isn't about a stolen cup. This is a setup. You're just the angry little brother getting back at us.
Exactly. The legal authority of his action would evaporate. The objective reality of the trap would be clouded by personal bias. Yusuf is acting as an architect of a system. He understands that true justice must be utterly blind to personal grievance in its execution. He sacrifices his own personal catharsis, the satisfaction of throwing their guilt in their faces right then and there to maintain the unbreakable integrity of the law.
It is the physics of trust, but applied internally. He trusts the systemic process he built more than he trusts the fleeting satisfaction of his own immediate emotional reactions. And that flawless system is about to grind the brothers down to dust. The judgment is passed based on the undeniable evidence. Benjamin is to be detained as a slave under their own tribal law. The brothers realize their slander didn't work. The system didn't care about their excuses, so, desperate, they try one last pathetic maneuver.
They attempt a plea bargain.
Having failed at logic and having failed at shifting the blame, they resort to the only tool they have left, which has historically been their primary weapon: emotional manipulation. They appeal to the minister's sense of pity. They offer one of themselves to stay in Benjamin's place. They cite their old grieving father, Yaqub, essentially saying, look, if we go back without this boy, our father might die of grief. You are a powerful, merciful man. Just take one of us instead and let the boy go.
And Yusuf's response is the final nail in the coffin. It is the absolute closure of the jurisdictional trap. He responds perfectly, but strictly within the impenetrable logic they themselves created. He says to them, God forbid we take anyone but him with whom we found our goods. If we did, we would be unjust.
That is just.
Yeah.
Chillingly brilliant. He turns their own plea against them. They're asking him to be merciful, to bend the rules because of a sad story. But he defines justice based entirely on the empirical reality they established.
It's exactly like dealing with a strict, originalist constitutional judge. Imagine a scenario where a corrupt lawyer comes before a judge. The lawyer's client has been caught dead to rights, breaking a harsh law that the lawyer himself actually lobbied for and helped write. The lawyer says, look, Your Honor, my client broke the law that I wrote, yes, but his family is really sad and he's had a hard life, so can you just ignore the evidence, let him go, and maybe put me in jail for a weekend instead just to call it even?
And the strict constitutionalist judge looks down from the bench and says, you wrote the law. The law explicitly says the man found with the contraband serves the time. I am merely enforcing the reality you constructed. To bend the law now, to ignore the empirical evidence based on your emotional plea, wouldn't be an act of mercy. It would be an act of tyranny. It would be a fundamental injustice to the entire legal system.
Yusuf's telling them, you cannot rewrite the rules of reality just because the consequences of those rules are finally hurting you.
And that absolute unyielding adherence to the law is what finally breaks them. The text describes the total collapse of their ego. They realize the minister is immovable. They pull aside to confer privately amongst themselves. And the eldest brother, the one who decades ago likely led the original plot to throw Yusuf in the well, is completely, utterly humiliated.
He realizes they are legally, morally, and intellectually bankrupt. Their manipulative tactics, the lies and emotional blackmail, which worked flawlessly for decades on their grieving father, have utterly failed against a true, uncompromising system of justice.
He gives up. The text says the eldest brother literally refuses to leave Egypt. He tells the others to go back home to Canaan. to stand before their father, and for what is likely the first time in their lives, simply state the cold, empirical facts. No spins, no emotional manipulation, no fabricated stories about wolves. He tells them to go back and say, your son stole. We only testify to what we know.
It marks the total, irreversible breakdown of their tribal ego. The sovereign's gambit has worked flawlessly. He has legally and safely extracted his brother. He has maintained his own absolute legal and moral integrity without breaking a single law. And he has forced his abusers, through the sheer weight of undeniable reality, to confront the inescapable consequences of their own actions.
We really need to take a step back and look at the whole board here. This deep dive has completely rewired how I view this narrative. It is not a simple, comforting fable about a good man who eventually forgives his bad brothers. It is a terrifyingly precise, almost clinical operation.
It highlights the brilliance of the sovereign strategy. He didn't fight them on their terms. He weaponized their own arrogance against them. He trapped them in their own archaic laws. He backed them into an inescapable corner using undeniable empirical proof, the hujat, and he executed all of it while maintaining complete, almost superhuman emotional control, suppressing his own profound trauma to ensure the system functioned perfectly.
And if you're listening right now, you might be wondering, why does this matter to me? I'm not an ancient Egyptian minister. It matters because this isn't just about ancient history or theology. It's a profound, highly applicable lesson in how to operate within complex systems today.
Exactly. We all live in a world of rigid structures, opaque laws, and highly emotional, often corrupt tribal dynamics. You see this in corporate politics, in bitter legal battles, in toxic family structures, and in international relations.
And what this source text teaches us is that true power doesn't come from dramatic emotional outbursts. If you are dealing with a corrupt system or abusive individuals, throwing a tantrum doesn't give you power. Breaking the rules to get your way doesn't make you a master. It just makes you another tyrant.
True power comes from understanding the rules so deeply, comprehending the physics of the social and legal systems you inhabit so thoroughly that you can engineer a flawless outcome within those boundaries. It's about doing the hard work to build the hujjat, the conclusive proof, and letting the immutable laws of reality do the heavy lifting for you.
But the story doesn't end there. We've watched the trap snap shut, but the ultimate psychological blow hasn't even landed yet. So we want to leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over. Picture the brothers. They are now completely cornered. Their tribal solidarity is fractured. Their manipulative egos are entirely shattered. They are standing in the court of an absolute sovereign, stripped of all their defenses, begging for a mercy the law simply cannot provide.
They are entirely broken by a faceless system.
But think about the psychological physics of what comes next. What happens to a person's psyche when the flawless, uncompromising architect of their absolute downfall finally decides the trap is fully closed? What happens when that terrifyingly powerful sovereign finally steps out from behind the curtain and reveals that he is the very victim they discarded in a well decades ago?
It is the ultimate psychological reckoning.
How do you survive the revelation that your judge, your executioner, the sovereign master of the system that just crushed your entire reality, is actually your prey? We started this deep dive talking about how we expect ancient texts to be simple, good guys, bad guys, clean lessons. But Yusuf didn't give them a clean break. He forced them to navigate the murky, terrifying waters of their own consequences, stripping away every lie and every defense until the only thing left visible in the room was their own inescapable guilt. Until next time.